when you think about a Category 5 hurricane, like Irma hitting the Caribbean,
Hmm.
the power is just, it's terrifying. The devastation, it really leaves a mark.
Yeah, it's more than just a word, isn't it? It's landscapes totally changed.
Exactly. And our source material for this deep dive, it calls that kind of storm ferocious and unforgiving.
And that's putting it mildly, I think. It's a force that can just pulverize buildings, Strong ones, too.
Absolutely. So today we're diving into a specific piece of source material. It's an audio clip, there's a transcript,
Yeah.
and it references USA Today.
Mm.
It looks at what happened after Hurricane Irma on St. Martin.
Right.
Our mission, really, is to unpack this specific account, pull out the key facts, maybe some surprising things it mentions, and try to understand what it highlights, not just the physical damage, but maybe how events like this get, well, interpreted sometimes.
And this particular source, it gives a really interesting kind of specific viewpoint on that immediate aftermath.
It really does.
Yeah.
And right at the center of what this source presents is this striking contrast. It's almost hard to believe. You've got all this destruction everywhere.
Right.
And then one property is described as, well, pretty much untouched. Okay, so let's unpack this a bit.
So this report, it really paints a picture of just how bad things were on St. Martin. It actually states that the rest of St. Martin was 95% destroyed after Irma hit.
95%. Wow.
Yeah. And crucially, it wasn't just like one type of building or one area.
Yeah, that's right. The account we're looking at, it specifically says, million-dollar villas and hotels, middle-class homes, even the ramshackle abodes of the poor and working-class residents. They all suffered similar fates, not just on St. Martin, but across the Caribbean where Irma hit, reduced to little more than kindling, it says.
And the human impact. Just devastating. The report mentions at least 9 people died just on the French side of St. Martin. So the scale of it, it affected everyone.
So you have this backdrop of just almost total obliteration across the island, hitting every kind of home, every kind of resident.
Yeah.
And then, right in the middle of describing all that, the narrative sort of zeroes in on one particular place. President Trump's property, Chateau des Palmiers, down on Plum Bay Beach.
Okay, and this is where that really surprising contrast comes in, the one highlighted in this USA Today referenced account.
Yeah.
Because while everything around it was apparently decimated, including, other fancy properties,
Right.
the source claims that Trump's place, the chateau, was still standing with hardly a single roof tile lost.
Still standing. It does mention the landscaping was a mess, which you'd expect.
Sure, trees down, debris everywhere, but the structure itself, the main house, reportedly largely intact.
And the report tries to bring this home with a specific story. It talks about a guy named Jack Fleischman. He co-owns Villa Millar, which the source says is just above Trump's place there on St. Martin.
Right, and Fleischman's own villa, according to this account, was heavily damaged, just wrecked by the storm.
Yep.
So the story goes, he's looking over the damage to his own place, this luxury estate, and then he looks down at Trump's house. And he couldn't believe his eyes, is how the source puts it, because it survived nearly unscathed.
He was so surprised. Apparently, the source says he quickly snapped a photo and sent it into USA Today as proof. So it's using this neighbor's reaction, his personal disbelief, to really hammer home that difference.
And that stark contrast, it's kind of further emphasized in the report when it talks about what happened to other well-known properties.
Like Richard Branson's place.
Exactly. It mentions liberal billionaire Richard Branson's private retreat on Necker Island was totally destroyed. That's the phrase used in the text we're examining.
And the report even quotes Branson, doesn't it? From a blog post he wrote.
Yeah, it does. He described visiting Virgin Gorda, seeing firsthand just how ferocious and unforgiving the storm was, talking about distributing aid, supplies, trying to help people.
Right, trying to help.
And Branson also apparently talked about how tough it was because the Virgin Islands are so isolated. He said something like, every island has been devastated, so there is no support to come from nearby, stressing the need for, major help to rebuild. So his account really underlines how widespread the destruction was. Multiple islands, not just St. Martin.
Okay, so now this is where the source material we're analyzing, it kind of shifts gears a bit. It moves from just reporting the damage.
Right.
To presenting a very specific interpretation of why there might be these differences, particularly between Trump's property and, well, as the source frames it, properties like Branson's.
Yeah, the report directly connects this observation, this contrast, to claims it says were made earlier by liberal celebrities who claimed Hurricane Irma was Mother Nature's wrath over Trump denying climate change.
Okay, so it's bringing in that angle.
And then the text asks, basically, if this were true, wouldn't his home have been the first to be destroyed? And then it offers its own conclusions, stating, it looks like God was looking down on our president and protecting him.
So it's really interesting how the source takes this single, striking visual, one house standing amidst ruin, and uses it to push back against certain narratives.
Yeah, about climate change or disaster causes.
And frame it in a completely different way.
Mm,
It really shows the power of a specific image or anecdote in shaping how people might see things.
definitely. This narrative presented within the source connects the physical outcome, the state of one building, directly to, well, political positions and even brings in divine intervention.
It really highlights how, when faced with something so huge and random like a massive hurricane, people often search for patterns, for meaning, in all the chaos.
Mm-hmm.
And this particular report, it goes beyond just listing a damage. It uses that one specific event within the disaster to make a point.
Which brings us back to you listening. We've sort of walked through this source material talking about the huge, devastating impact of Irma across places like St. Martin, the Virgin Islands.
Yeah, destruction, hitting everything, modest homes, fancy villas like Jack Fleischman's that got heavily damaged, Richard Branson's place reportedly destroyed.
Total destruction, yeah. And then as this specific report lays it out, you get this really stark contrast. President Trump's property, Chateau de Palmiers, apparently standing with minimal structural damage right in the middle of all that ruin.
The details the source provides, like the neighbor, Fleischman, his disbelief, the photo sent to USA Today, Branson's account of the devastation elsewhere in his aid efforts, they make that particular narrative feel very vivid.
And as we've pointed out, the source material itself offers up some pretty specific interpretations, right? It suggests links between political views and the storm's effects, even hinting at divine protection.
So the question for you is, what stands out when you hear this specific account? What does this one anecdote, as is presented in our source material, make you think about? Maybe about how unpredictable these huge storms are, or maybe about how people try to find meaning or patterns when catastrophe strikes.
Yeah, because if, like the source describes, you have this massive, seemingly random destruction hitting all sorts of homes.
Rich, poor, everything in between.
And yet this one specific property reportedly comes through almost okay structurally. Well, what does that specific contrast suggest?
Does it say something about the location? Maybe the construction? Or just
Okay.
a pure chance? What factors really decide who or what survives when a ferocious and unforgiving storm comes through?
It definitely raises an important question.